a little bit, say, are we already seeing these catastrophic effects? And then we'll talk about a little bit about CO2 abatement programs like the cap and trade bill that's in front of Congress and the Copenhagen Treaty. Okay, has the world warmed? Yes, I'm not going to argue about it. There's no point, again, you know, I think a lot of skeptics waste their time arguing on stuff there's no point in arguing about. This is the temperature history. You're going to see this funny thing called anomaly. Scientists think they know how much the world has warmed. They can't agree on what temperature it actually is. It's very similar to saying, we're totally lost, but we know we just drove 20 miles. Okay, so that's why you will always see anomaly. They can tell you how much it's changed, but they don't know what the actual temperature is. They can't agree on it, or whether or not a global temperature even has any meaning anyway. So this is the temperature. It's from the Hadley Center, totally normal source of data. It switches over here to more modern methodology, which is the satellites. The orange is a moving average, but that's your temperature history. The world has warmed 0.8, 0.6 degrees C, about a degree Fahrenheit over the last 150 years. And there's really not a lot of point in debating that that's happened. One of the more interesting things, and I'll lead into saying, go on to Google and search for global warming accelerating. And you will get 1.2 million articles that say global warming is accelerating. I am not one who necessarily believes that the fact that temperatures have been flat over the last 10 years means that global warming isn't necessarily caused in part by man. But I don't know how anybody can honestly say that global warming is accelerating. Here is a zoom in of this chart. I have not put a trend line on it because currently we're in the midst of trend line wars where various people are taking this chart, and you can see lots of peaks and values, which means people can do trend lines this way or they can do it this way. And I'm just not going to play this game. But I think visually you can tell that there's, one, I don't see any acceleration there, and two, it sure looks awfully flat for the last 8 or 9 years. And that is not something, no matter what they say the climate models predicted, it doesn't mean that the theory is necessarily wrong, but it's certainly a reason to look more closely at it. The other thing we've done in the last 10 years with satellites is we put all kinds of new instrumentation to measure the oceans, because the oceans, land doesn't hold heat very well, so most of the heat the Earth holds is buried in the oceans. They're the heat reservoirs for the Earth. And so measuring ocean temperatures is critical. There's satellites to do it. We also have these really cool floats, these Argo floats that just float freely all around the world, and they drop a tongue like 800 feet into the water every day and measure the temperature down to different depths. It's really cool technology. But basically these new technologies over the last 7, 8 years have not seen, I think there's a little bit of a cooling trend. I'm not going to claim that. Let's just claim that it's basically been a flat trend in sea surface temperatures as well. So it's difficult to find a warming trend over the last 10 years. I'm going to take a little bit of an aside here on temperature measurement because I promised some folks that I would talk about two things. One is the role of amateurs in climate, because I'm an amateur, and also the role that kids can play, since I'm at my kid's school, and also because this has an Arizona connection. I thought it'd be fun to tell. This map, forget about the colors for a second, this map with the crosses is a map of the U.S. climate monitoring system. It's basically the 1,000+ stations that are used that roll up into that temperature number I showed you before. These all roll up into that in a fairly complex, sometimes ugly way. And so there's a guy named Anthony, and a lot of these are actually in people's houses. I've been to some of them. They're actually in their backyards. And for years, for hundreds of years, people would just go out and amateurs would actually be the temperature monitoring station. They would go out and they'd read the thermometer and read the anemometer and read the rain gauge and write it down and turn it into NOAA or whatever the predecessor organization was, and the National Weather Service, and that's how we would monitor a lot of climate. Now most of these are automated now, but they're still in a lot of people's houses. So there's been a strong role for amateurs, and there's been an amateur effort to sort of document the condition of these, because there's a guy named Anthony Watt up here in California that went and looked at a couple and said, God, these installations are horrible. I mean, they're not at all what the standards book says a temperature installation should look like. Because you have to be very careful how you set up a temperature installation to make sure that it measures well, there's no biases. And so I actually went down to back to this chart. You take that data and say, how much has the U.S. supposedly gotten warmer over the last 100 years? In fact, the U.S. actually has had, the world has had global warming, the U.S. has had none. And by the way, last October was the 3rd coldest in the century. So the U.S. really hasn't experienced global warming, a lot of the rest of the world has. But Tucson had, for some reason. Some of y'all from Tucson. Tucson was the most warming of any place in the country. So I said, God, I got to see that. A lot of hot air in Tucson, I guess. And so, if I was an ASU fan, I probably could make a better joke, but I won't get into that. But I went down, and this is actually at U of A, for those who went to U of A, maybe recognize it. And this is probably the most famous photograph I will ever take, because it's all over the internet. It's been in many, many presentations all around the world. I still see it. I'm watching some video on TV, and I'll see my photograph, and people call me all the time. Anyway, I took this photograph, and it turned out to be an example of a terrible weather monitoring station. Weather monitoring stations are supposed to be in natural ground, not near buildings, not near anything that could raise the temperature or bias the temperature from what would be a natural temperature. This one's sitting in an asphalt parking lot. And surrounded by buildings. When I was there later, a car came and parked right by it, had the engine running and everything. And so the only one I've seen better than this was one that Anthony found that actually had the burn barrel for an apartment, and they burn all the trash right next to the thermometer. But this one has been famous, and so you can see the asphalt holds heat at night. It releases it in the evening, it gains heat in the day, releases at night. The buildings block the wind. Basically, if y'all listen to the news, or if you've actually been to television news, you know that often you'll see the forecast, it'll say it's going to be 52 tonight in Phoenix and 46 in the outlying areas. The reason for that is cities raise temperature, and I'm going to show you an experiment we did on that a while back. And so we said, gosh, this is terrible. 100 years from now, that's Old Main there. That's what that location looked like. And so it went from that to that. So are we measuring global warming? Or are we measuring the building of Tucson? Okay? And so then I started going, look at these, and there's my son. He's now humiliated there in the back of the room. And so this was a science project we did. By the way, this is a great science project. You go out, and they tell you on the internet how to do the survey approach. We took these pictures, and we found a metal building that reflected heat on this temperature measurement station. This one was next to air conditioning exhaust in a junkyard. This one's in an asphalt parking lot right up against the building, and they store all their stuff around it. These are terrible locations that are full of biases. And so we're sitting here, the National Weather Service says that these kind of installations should have biases, should have errors of 2, 3, 4 degrees C. Well, we're trying to measure a warming signal that's half a degree. How do you measure a half a degree of warming over a century with an instrument that's 4 degrees out of whack because of the biases of where it's located? One other project, because I haven't humiliated my family enough, and what we actually did is we took, these are cheap, this is almost even a throwaway, it lasts about 5 years. And this is a temperature measurement device, and you can actually connect to the computer and take the temperatures off of it. We also did GPS, and had the two times synchronized, so we could match in an Excel spreadsheet the temperatures to the GPS. And we could actually, then we started driving around Phoenix at night. And we start in the center and we drive north, start in the center, drive south. This is when we drove north on I-17. We started in the city center, it was reading 52.5 degrees. By the time we got to the outlying area, about 20 minutes later, we were at 46. It dropped 7 degrees in that drive. Now, you think, well, maybe it was cooling off for the night, that bias, so we drove back. And we see it wasn't because it was just cooling off. You see that it really is a 7-degree difference between the inside of Phoenix and the outside of Phoenix. So I'll tell you right now, if Phoenix ever has a low temperature record, it will be unbelievable. Same with Tucson. I've read an article once that was written, Tucson may never have a low temperature record. And the reason for it is this, is to set a low temperature record, you have to really effectively be 7 degrees below what the temperature record was before because of the urban heating on top of it. So anyway, so that's a little bit of an aside about amateurs and the kind of things that we've been doing, that kids can do kind of in this project. To wrap it back up, the professionals have done this too, and this is a study in California, but they've done this over and over. But in California, they found that over the last 50 years, that the urban thermometer showed a degree of warming, the rural thermometer showed a third of a degree. So does that mean that global warming is really that differentiation, it's just picking on big cities, or does that mean that maybe the big city thermostats, the big city thermometers, are biased by the city growing around it? And so the conclusion is that there certainly has been warming, but it may be overstated. And it certainly has been flat in the last 10 or 15 years. So we probably see 0.6, 0.8 degrees of warming, but you might be able to half that to take into account measurement biases. And we certainly haven't seen any in the last 10 years. So now I'm going to ask how much of that's from CO2. And I use this analogy a lot. My cell phone here is warm. The battery creates heat. So if you have a cell phone, it creates heat. So it would be settled science that our cell phones create heat. But does that mean cell phones are the primary driver for the temperature in this room? Probably not. The air